Hi, Joe Navarro here. And when we talk about poker tells, again, we're talking about the brain, we're talking about the limbic brain and how that brain of ours reacts to the world around us. Now, I've talked about situational awareness, I've talked about observing people. And what our brain does is really rather remarkable. When we feel good, when we're comfortable with others, we tend to mirror their behavior. We tend to do the same things that they do. So they tilt their head, we tilt their head, they nod, we nod, and so forth. But when it comes to negative things, our limbic brain evolved a wonderful system to deal with anything that's a threat. And now that could be a snake that crawls into our room, or it could be a hand that's been dealt to you that is going to hurt your bankroll. And our first reaction, our first limbic reaction to anything negative is usually the freeze response. Now, most of us have heard of the fight or flight response. Well, that's actually erroneous, because if it was truly fight or flight, we would be exhausted and bruised all the time. We evolved to freeze first so that we can, number one, assess what's the situation. And number two, so that if there's predators out there, they don't notice us. Now, obviously, you don't need to know all the details of this to play poker, but just be aware that the freeze response, even though there's no big tigers out there and there's no car coming at us, still applies in poker. And how do you see it? You'll see people who hold very still when they go all in and they know they have a rag hand, when they're bluffing. We see the freeze response when you are concerned, and so you tend to bring your elbows in closer to your body. You tend to hold still. You talk less, and so forth. This is a limbic response. It's millions of years old, which says restrain yourself, hold yourself. Don't allow anything to notice you, because you are most likely very weak or insecure at the moment. Our second response, beyond the freeze response, is our limbic flight response. And so we distance ourselves from the things that we think could hurt us or weaken us. And you see the distancing response, the flight response, every day. Now, in ancient times, you saw a threat, maybe a tiger or a lion, so you ran. Well, first you held still, but then if you had to, you ran. Well, most of us are in offices or we're at the poker table. We can't run. So what we do is we distance ourselves. And you see it with poker players who all of a sudden push away from the table. They don't like their cards. Or they begin to handle their cards by touching them on the edges. You often see this with people who are about to fold. They grab their cards by the edges, what I've come to call the card shuttle, in the same way that if I handed you a dirty diaper, you would hold it like this. They do the same thing. They begin to touch things more distantly. They withdraw from it. And last is the fight response. Now, obviously, we don't want to see any fighting in poker, but usually what you see in poker is very aggressive play or very aggressive behavior, name calling, insults to other players. Well, if you're strong, you don't have to insult somebody. You don't have to call somebody ignorant or stupid or talk about how poorly they're playing. What do you care? If you're strong, you just want their chips. So we often see this fight response, which is really aggression, sometimes passive, sometimes very verbal, with players who are actually very weak. And this is part also of the limbic system. So when we look at limbic behaviors, three things that come to mind that you should always remember. And it's not just comfort and discomfort, but are we seeing a freeze response, restrained behavior? Are we seeing the flight response, distancing? Or are we seeing the fight response, which is very aggressive very personalized behavior.